Welcome to episode 1 of Weekend at Crombie's. Our first movie is Santa Claus, the movie.
Welcome to the first Weekend at Crombie's. I am your co-host. My name is Huw.
And I am James Evans, Esquire. Biologically father to one, but philosophically father to many.
We are going to be looking at movies, and I don't think we've got any closer than giving it a theme for that. We are looking at movies that have occurred to us to look at.
I think that works.
That works.
I usually find that things that I enjoy doing are things that occur to me. So in that way, this, within reason, within legal parameters, so therefore this acts quite nicely as fulfilling two distinct functions. I enjoy watching films and I enjoy talking about films.
Indeed. And we've added the third thing is trying to maintain an internet connection, which...
Yeah. Not as easy as it looks in the 21st century.
Yeah, we should tell our lovely podcast listeners that we are in fact not in the same country. We are using the miracle of the internet to communicate with each other.
Yeah, as millions of people do.
So if one of us sounds like they're in a cave, that might be because they are. We just don't know.
If one of us is in the cave, it's got better internet reception than I do in my house. So I've had to move seats already once today to get the best reception here.
That was in the pre-edit, but it was golden stuff. It involved a lot of moving. Without further ado, let's get to the structure. We are going to be looking...
Blessed relief.
We are going to be looking at Santa Claus the movie. This was...
As everyone switches off.
Bear with us. Santa Claus the movie of 1985. It was the tale of Santa Claus the movie. That's
maybe a film I'd like to see, actually. A film about the filming of Santa Claus the movie.
Yes.
Santa Claus the movie. The
movie. It did have, again, a troubled production, and it was not, by all accounts, a financial success. So this is a wonderful reason to look at it.
Yeah.
Before we really, get our hands in the dough, let's recap the plot of Santa Claus the movie. We open in what appears to be the medieval times in a Christmas Eve in a barn, full of peasants. I think is probably the best way you can describe it. It is
I'd call them lumpen proletariat. I can smell the barn. There's a distinct absence of animals, but nevertheless, the wretched and the poor are gathered together in some kind of hovel.
Yeah, although a very posh hovel, because there's an old lady with the best received pronunciation accent you'll hear, telling all the children about the Vendigum who come out on Christmas Day.
Yeah, I also like the fact in this hovel, all the kids want are presents. Typical.
But anyway, they're basically these people are hanging around in their hovel in the snow, waiting for someone to come, and it wouldn't be Christmas Eve without him. And his reindeer can get through, and who could it be? It turns out to be an overweight woodcutter called Claus and his wife, who apparently do the rounds in this location, delivering hand-whittled wooden toys to the children.
I mean, what a coincidence that his name's Claus as well. That was lucky.
I know, and he's a big guy with a white beard, and everyone seems to like him, and he seems to like the kids. He kind of, he brings out a smile in all of them. And there's a moment when his wife Anya kind of, says he makes the time because he loves seeing the happiness and smiles on their faces. Bless him. And then he possibly makes a potentially fatal choice to go out in the blizzard when they warn him you'll never make it, because apparently the other village needs their toys too, and this village can't wait a day to get their toys. They've got to have them right now, and if Claus and his wife and their two reindeer die doing it, well, that's just collateral damage.
Yeah, this other village desperately need wooden toys for their overprivileged children.
So we had the twinkly beginning, we had the nice little story about the elves, we had Claus come in, and then it does get quite dark because they go out in the snowdrift, they get lost, the two reindeer collapse immediately. Claus gets out and gives a rousing speech that involves them saying, "You'll die in the snow if you don't get out."
I mean, it's Cuba Gooding Jr. level of Jerry Maguire style speech, isn't it? It's that rousing. I thought. Well, there's a lot at stake.
There is a lot at stake. But they weren't roused, so it's not that rousing because the reindeers stay put. The reindeers
a glorious failure.
Yeah, and then Anya, his wife, starts to panic and goes quiet, and then Claus starts saying things like "Oh my God," and cuddles her, and then the snow covers them all, and
it's pretty bleak. It is pretty bleak.
Yeah. However, the movie doesn't end there. It turns out they haven't died, or did they? But they've been magically transported to a magical kingdom, apparently in the North Pole, which is very chocolate boxy. It's very twinkly lights and lots and lots of elves march out with their elf torches. It turns out they're there to rescue Claus and his wife and their reindeer, and tell them that they belong here in the North Pole now.
It's an oddity because, admittedly, Claus has died and has been resurrected, which is an odd thing to have happen to anyone, I would imagine. I mean, there's obviously one other famous story of someone being resurrected that I can think of off the top of my head. And there's lots of parallels as well with the story of Jesus Christ and Santa Claus. No, there is, I think. In this particular film there is. Okay. But they take it with good grace. They take it, they're very stoic.
They are.
They just accept that this has happened to them, and they are being brought into this magical kingdom with hundreds of short men, kind of worrying around them, busying themselves, without not really a single question.
They don't seem to care much about getting those toys to the village anymore. That was life or death 2 minutes ago, and now it's like, well, they ain't getting their toys now.
Yeah, exactly. No one's getting their toys, and I find that very strange. I mean, yeah, we'll probably come on to it, but there's lots in that first half an hour that I find bewilderingly strange, actually.
Yeah. So we should also mention that the elves are led by a British character actor who names himself Dooley. He's kind of the entry point into the elves. He's the administrator of Elfland. But also Dudley Moore is there with a couple of friends, kind of hanging around, being Dudley Moore-ish. He's critiquing Santa Claus's sleigh. And things of that nature, because we learn later he's a bit of an inventor, and then he charms Mrs. Claus by calling her nice and pretty and nice. And
it isn't creepy in any way, shape, or form. But there's lots of interesting characters in the elves. So Melvin Hughes is one of the elves. I think wasn't he in Ain't Half Hot Mum?
They had a couple of Ain't Half Hot Mum. I think he's in there.
Christopher Ryan is in there, who was one of the young ones.
Oh, Mike the Cool. He doesn't speak at all. He's the last one they make fun of.
He's a factor. He's the special needs elf, which is sad because it's not inclusive at all. I mean, they just basically bully him.
Well, there were no elf women at all.
Either, no. So I suppose they've got to release the tension somehow.
But there's clearly elf aging, because some elves are older than others. Even though no elf appears to age over the course of the movie, there are elves that are definitely older than other elves. So clearly there must be some kind of elf procreation. But before we get into this, we're kind of straying from the plot to the mechanics of the world. We are.
We'll get on to the analysis shortly.
Although I will say, this is the beginning of when Dudley Moore appears as the elf, and he starts really pounding the elf puns. Every other sentence he says is some kind of wordplay, and it's not even clever wordplay. It just substitutes elf for self. So you'll have elf confidence and elf esteem and elf reliance, and anything Dudley Moore will say will have elf in it somehow.
Elf and safety, big issue. They
don't even do elf and safety. They could have tried replacing elf. National elf. But anyway, Santa and his wife and the reindeer are dragged back into the elf kingdom, and it's in fairness, inside is a very chocolate box, nice elf workshop. It's all colourful. There's wooden toys there.
It's beautiful.
It's
beautiful.
Yeah, and the music does it too. When they open up Santa's massive warehouse, the score swells, and it's like, this is something really pretty. So I'm gonna, in case you've heard any beeps, I'm turning my phone off because our wives are wishing us well and ruining the podcast as they do so. So they're having a conversation on WhatsApp about what an achievement their two husbands do when they lock themselves away and have this kind of thing.
Yeah. Talk about Santa Claus the movie for an hour.
Indeed.
So they must be so proud of us.
So we were last at the elf workshop, and in fact, as you said, the first 40 minutes of this movie is all origin and largely montage.
Yeah.
But we haven't hit the montage. We've had one montage so far where the elves are doing their jolly elvish thing, where they make the toys and they
it's brilliant.
Yeah.
I actually noted that down. It's that to me is one of the best parts of the film. Actually, the first montage where they get going about their business, it's choreographed brilliantly, and it's really fantastic music, and I think it was fantastic.
Yeah, it sticks with you. They're all tapping their hammers into rhythm. They all get out of bed and they turn the names on. It's a bit of world building, really, because they didn't need to do that much. But
no. I
think that, and a bit later on, they mentioned season's greetings, which you don't really know what it means. But it's like a star arrives at a certain point, and that kicks off the Christmas season.
Yeah.
And we're really filled by it, and it's not necessary at all, but it fleshes out the world of the elves.
They work as markers in the sand, don't they, so that you can orientate yourself around the story in that context. You know what this is about now. You know what's happening, and I think that was really well done. Yeah. Those are two standout scenes for me, actually.
Santa Claus, he gets his red suit. Because Dudley Moore suggests doing it red, and Puffy, who I'll return to. Puffy is the other prominent elf in Elfland. Yeah. He's kind of Dudley Moore's opposite number. He's very conservative and has a fairly rubbish beard. He suggests brown, and everyone's like, Puffy.
you idiot.
You could tell that night Puffy was just kicking himself, thinking, I wanted to say red. Red was my first instinct, but I went with brown. But Santa has a nice red suit. The Santa is starting to being built, and on the first Christmas night, he's got his whole team of reindeer. He's got 8 of them, and a very, very old elf is led on. He's so old he's got like 12 elves carrying his beard. Played by none of
Burgess Meredith.
Burgess Meredith is playing the old elf.
Who, by the way, isn't introduced.
No.
Or anything. There's no context for this elf. He's just wheeled out. I don't know who he is. Who is he? Is he God?
Yeah, I think he's
just an old elf.
He's billed as just I think he's billed as the really old elf, which is fair enough.
Ancient elf.
Yeah.
But like this, it was an odd. I found that quite an odd context, because everyone's like really reverential because he's old.
Yeah.
But it's the first and only time he's seen.
Yeah. I thought. Yeah. I remember as a child that it made no sense to me. Who is this guy? Because it seemed like Dooley was in charge, but no, it's this old elf is the Reverend.
This old man, who nobody's mentioned before.
Yeah, but thinking about why it was there, it does give it a nice bit of gravity. You know, they're doing the whole kind of this is the bit where it really sets out the stall that this is Santa Claus's mission is, and this is the chosen one who would come to us. He would be a maker of toys. He would love all children. He would deliver our goods. And I think you need that to be said at the start of the movie. And I think you need someone who basically isn't one of the jolly, funny elves to say it, because if like Dooley had just gone, Santa, you are going to be the chosen one.
You're right. It's a bit of gravitas, isn't it? It's a bit of
and in fact, Burgess Meredith did it. I think he brought a lot of nice gravitas to it. I was expecting when I saw his name, like, yeah, that dumb punk Santa Claus, and you're gonna get on that sleigh.
But it's good.
It is good. I did think though, because there's a hush there. The elves are hushed. Santa is like, got a lump in his throat. He's being told he is eventually going to be this immortal figurehead. He's no longer a man who makes toys. He's going to be, the gift to the world. But then right after that, the elves skip past with reindeer dust, and they start feeding the reindeers, and the jolly little tune starts up again, and it kind of pulls the rug under, because it's like, Santa Claus. Yeah. It's like, you kind of wanted a bit more of a moment there. But yeah.
Yeah, I quite liked that though. That transition. I mean, for me, it had to get on with it a little bit at that point. I think it needed to move on. Well, the thing I found interesting with that particular bit though is okay. I mean, I appreciate we're still discussing the plot here, and we're probably within the first 8 minutes of the film.
No, we're half an hour in by this point. It took a long time to set its stall out.
Yeah, but at this point, Santa Claus has died, been resurrected, gone into this ice palace in the North Pole, has been told he's immortal, by the way, has witnessed the elves toiling for a year on the toys that will eventually be passed over to all the children of the world. And at no point has he questioned what's happening. But more importantly, at no point has anyone told him what's going on?
Yeah. Because
he doesn't know until that moment that he is going to go and give toys to all the children of the earth. Why wait for a year? Why not do that at the moment he turns up? Surely I want to know that immediately.
We will come into this when we discuss the themes, but you're right. There's no point when Mr. Claus, the guy, says, I'm not sure I want to do this. I want to go home.
Yeah. Or hang on. All right, I've been here for a couple of months now, and your hospitality, very nice. Thank you very much indeed. I appreciate that. You've treated my wife and I very well, and Donna and Blitzen. We couldn't ask for more. But what's going on? Could someone please tell me what's happening? Yeah. I'm immortal. What? Even that? Just what?
It is funny because it's almost because we know who Santa Claus is. We know he's going to pick the red suit. We know he's going to have the 8 reindeer.
Yeah.
It's kind of like they know too, because as soon as Burgess Meredith says you will be known as Santa Claus, does anyone know what? Because his name's Claus. Does anyone know what Santa means? It's like, oh,
maybe
Santa.
It's his first name.
So and
he's like, yeah, I know. I've been called Santa Claus for like 50 years. It's who I am. What do you mean? Just tell me what I need to do. What am I doing here? Don't repeat back to me my name. That doesn't mean anything.
But anyway, the reindeer have munched their golden sparkly things, which does come into play. That's the MacGuffin of the movie, is the golden sparkly reindeer stuff. And so Santa Claus then gets in, and ho ho ho, he's very keen to do the ho ho hoing. Just rockets off into what could be at least 2 or 3 montages. It kicks off. You see time passing. So he starts off. I looked at the hourglass. It's kind of around the 13th, 12th century when the hourglass starts. And he just goes on, and lots of kids get their toys. And there's a children's choir singing about "Thank you, Santa."
But also, there's a really good kind of. There's a lot of. Carols. The music's really good at that point as well, because there's a montage of carols as well, which is really good. So for each century that passes, there's a different carol that is being developed at a point in time. And I don't know whether each particular carol is distinctive of that particular century or that time. But as the time goes by, more and more carols are sung in the background, which I thought was a really nice touch. And what it does, it moves the story on very nicely. It's a quintessential piece of filmmaking, I think. It moves the story on quickly without any words, and you know exactly what's happening at that particular point in time. He's establishing himself as the Santa Claus.
Yeah, but also nothing marks an 80s film like a huge montage.
Oh yeah, exactly, yeah. And could you be any more literal by having an egg timer?
But he establishes himself as Santa Claus to us, not to the world. We see the occasional child holding a toy happy, but we don't get the sense of the world is now realising, because this has happened and they weren't expecting it to. From last year there was no toys under the tree. Now there's lots of toys under the tree.
Yeah, exactly.
There's that. Also, again, we come to the Santa himself evolves. We get the fact he gives toys to nice children and naughty children. Because there is a troubling cat torture sequence.
Yeah, there is, which I found quite distressing.
I thought you might. Yeah, I was thinking you would not like the poor cat.
Well, there was a lot in the film. There was a lot in the film that I'd forgotten over the years, but I hadn't forgotten that.
Well, you see, and the little girl, Miss Sarah Foster, writes to Santa and tells of how naughty her brother was. And really, the response to Miss Sarah Foster is, snitches get stitches. But instead, Santa decides he's going to cut everyone out now. So presumably, for the last 500 years, because this is an 18th century thing, he hasn't realised children can be naughty. They've all been either very good up to that point, or he's just been oblivious to it.
Yeah, there has been some absolute scumbags who have got brilliant toys. I mean, there has. I bet there must have been.
Yeah.
There'd have been, like, I don't know, animal abusers, torturers. But they get their wooden toy, didn't they?
Yeah. And then
they all get their wooden toy.
And then we go to another montage, and then we cut again when we hear The Night Before Christmas being read aloud, which is quite meta, but also quite fun. Especially when the Dooley again has to read out the part where Santa's fat, so he fat shames Santa. And then they cut to the ultimate sequence of someone is having a diet because they're glum and they're chewing celery.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's brilliant, actually.
But then we kind of slam into the present day, which is again the 1980s present day, and we hit something that resembles a plot. So we're 40 minutes in. We've had our origin, we've had our several montages, and now
and the film's only about an hour and 40 minutes anyway. So a large bulk of the film is the setup.
Yeah. And I think this, again, we can come to the theme of it, but this is, I think, because it's Santa Claus : the movie. They set their stall out and they want to tell you about Santa Claus, the movie. It's not just Santa Claus has an adventure in the 1980s and this is the story. It's we're going to do the big origin story, but we'll come to that. Into the actual plot, we see we see Joe first, the shivering little urchin, and then the poor little rich girl Cornelia sees him from a window, and then puts out some food for him.
I mean, it's very Victorian, isn't it? It's very Victorian in that context, because Joe, he's got like soot on his face. I don't know where he's got the soot from. Not a chimney sweep.
Yeah, although we do find, we'll come to Joe, but he's like, he's definitely 1920s. He's Depression era, is Joe.
He is, yeah.
He's Cornelia, you can imagine living in the 1980s. Joe, when he meets anyone, he's all like, "Hey, what are you doing, you dumb egg? Keep away from me, or I ought to slug you."
And also, rather presumptuously, within about a minute of meeting Cornelia, he calls her corny, which really got my back up. Because how dare he? How dare he? That's not her name.
Well, he should know his place, you mean?
Well, it's just rude. It's just rude. My name's not Corny. Corny's. I mean, you wouldn't shorten it to Corny anyway.
Well, it's implied they know each other because she feeds him. Not unlike someone would feed a cat. It must be said. I think they were trying to establish that she's a nice person and feels for him. But also she just lays a bowl of food on the floor.
Because she feeds the homeless with a.
Yeah, but she puts the bowl.
Massive fridge.
She puts the plate on the floor and goes, "Little boy, little boy," and then he scampers.
He's like a hedgehog. He's like a hedgehog.
The thing that bothered me,
he's got a bit of bread and milk.
No, she gives him I think she gives him a turkey dinner. It's good protein there, but she also gives him a can of Coke. I'm thinking he's freezing in the cold. The last thing he needs is
I'll get onto some of the product placement in the film due course, but there's one particular scene in the film which I'll hold back on, but it might be my favourite scene in the film actually. But we'll come on to that.
Okay, so. We've established there's a little homeless boy called Joe and a poor little rich girl called Cornelia, and is it now Santa Claus befriends Joe? And once again he's riding around New York saying what a wonderful thing is there's no child unhappy, every child is happy on Christmas Eve, which portrays again a bit of myopia towards the state of the world. So I'm sure there's several billion children unhappy at any one time.
Well, I was going to say we don't see his trips to sub-Saharan Africa, do we?
Yeah, he's probably meaning every child with a fireplace is happy right now, and they're the only ones he sees. And Santa's one experience with children over the last 800 years is when they're unconscious and asleep. So probably he just thinks they're wonderful, happy, well-adjusted,
really quiet, well-behaved.
Yeah, no wonder he loves children. This is the secret to Santa's jolliness. He doesn't have to deal with children when they're awake. But he sees Joe and decides to befriend him. Joe, who was previously seen. Regular guys dressed as Santa in a cynical fashion. They're kind of pocketing the charity money and drinking from a brown paper bag and this kind of stuff. So Joe clearly doesn't like Santa and is a bit rude to him when he arrives in the kind of the Depression era dialect he's adopted. But immediately turns around. Santa Claus Shazams him to the roof of where his reindeer are parked, and Joe is suddenly sparkly-eyed and going, "Oh my God, you really are Santa! Gee whiz!"
Well, I mean, but also there's no hiding of Santa Claus's identity or anything. I mean, he's like, "Yeah, I'm Santa Claus." Bing, disappeared, and they're on the top of a tower block. And I mean, Joe takes it all fairly well.
The fact he's being kidnapped now.
Admittedly, we've established that Santa Claus didn't really bat an eyelid when he was told that he was immortal. So this is a world in which strange and unusual events are passed off as fairly standard.
Unless you're a cat torturer, in which case they'll throw the book at you. But they go for again. Santa Claus treats Joe to a flight around New York with his reindeer, and in fact, this is I was watching this, and it's reminiscent of the Superman flight. Really, if you think about it, when Superman takes Lois Lane for a flight around New York,
there's a lot of it in there. Yeah, I agree. There's a lot of it in there. The flying. I mean, I actually think they did the flying really well for the time. I thought. I mean, it still stands up quite well. It's not perfect, but it's not bad at all. But you can see there's a lot of Superman in this.
Yeah,
there really is.
No, we'll come to that in the thematic things. That's what I was thinking too. But again, in terms of, you're right about the flight, and I think it was actually getting the real life reindeer and these effects that broke the film's budget.
You probably was, yeah.
But in fairness, you've not seen before or since that kind of live action. If you want your kids to see Santa Claus the movie, which this is, you get your reindeer, you get your Santa Claus. He's there already.
Yeah, and the reindeer are really kind of well-designed, animatronic style, mechanical creatures. They're really well executed.
Yeah. Some of the things, so a mix of real and animatronic.
And any people that haven't seen the film, that's not a spoiler. They aren't executed. It's that they're well designed. That would be a different film.
Speaking of executions, there is a moment. So Santa Claus is taking Joe round the various houses, and he stops at Cornelia's house. Cornelia has stayed up late to sneak a peek at Santa. And Santa gives us the strangest... He says, "Oh boy, I hate it when this happens." And you think, if Santa loves children, loves to see the light of their eyes...
Gone out, isn't he?
I thought a silenced revolver is the next thing he's going to do. It's like, the secret of Santa must be kept.
Yeah.
Joe, you're with me now. You've got to bury the body. You're an accessory, Joe. Come on, get your shovel. We feed them to the reindeer. That's how the Santa Claus stays a secret. But he doesn't do that. He gives her a toy piano, and she gives him some cookies. That upset me as a child. The whole Santa eats cookies, because in my mind Santa ate mince pies, and in this world they eat nothing but cookies.
Yeah, and as a kind of piece of social realist filming, you expect those details, those nuances, to be perfectly formed. So when he eats a cookie, the internal logic of the film completely goes, doesn't it? That's it. It's gone now. I can't believe anything else in the film because he's eating a cookie. Also,
he says chocolate chip my favourite, and that's redundant. You don't just say chocolate chip's favourite. Chocolate chip's everyone's favourite.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's just stupid.
Ooh, raisins! You are spoiling me.
Yeah. I love this carrot you've left. Is this carrot for me or the reindeer?
Just the one carrot to share between the 8 reindeer. It's a good job I feed them human flesh every now and again when they I find children's bones far more effective in giving reindeer their balanced diet. Yeah. So, having set up now these two cherubs, we don't see them again until next Christmas, but Santa flies home, and there is a comment that kind of due to the population explosion, it's getting harder work for him because he's got to give a toy for every child, but there's lots more children out there. So he faints into his...
That's the lumpen proletariat for you, Hugh.
I know,
that is the lumpen proletariat for you.
The surplus population, as Scrooge might say.
I know.
But they decide when he claps into his soup that he needs an assistant. And this is what kicks off the main bit of the plot, is when he decides to essentially audition for an assistant. So, and they, again, this is back where I'm feeling sorry for Puffy, because when Santa Claus's wife and Dooley, the head elf, are discussing who could the assistant be, you can tell they'd like it to be Patch, because they're giggling already, saying, "Oh, one of them's going to bounce to mind, and we can think of someone." And they're like, "Oh, well, let's make it a contest. Let's give Puffy a chance." And so Patch, being Dudley Moore, and established as some kind of mad inventor, whereas Puffy is a traditionalist. He believes in handcrafting wooden toys and putting your heart and soul into every toy you make.
Yeah. What's wrong with that?
You'd think that was exactly up Santa's alley. That's pretty much what Santa's been doing since the film began. Handcrafting.
Yeah, exactly. Toys. Yeah. That is Santa Claus's eternal decision. That's what he's been doing ad infinitum. That's him. I mean, why would he suddenly change? I mean, that's just ridiculous. It's very 80s in that regard.
Yes, because again, Dudley Moore sets up an assembly line. The Patch-O-Matic, which makes toys, but of course, which does make good toys. It automatically churns out all these little buggies and stuff. But Dudley Moore's hubris gets the better of him, and he cranks up the speed, and all of a sudden these toys are being made without bolts in, and they're being made shonky. Although they do come out looking okay, so presumably being held together with paint or whatever. But the toys look okay as soon as they come out. And
not for long.
But Santa, seeing that Dudley Moore's made 1 million toys and poor Puffy's made like 3 very nice toys, immediately rewards
beautifully crafted, industry standard. They'll last you for decades.
This is obviously Santa's idea of how to recruit as well, though. It's just like, let's not have interviews or anything. Let's have a big old competition, and all I care about is churning out the toys. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
So Santa's not a great person in HR.
No, he's not a great manager, is he? He's not a great people person.
He's not a great people person. So anyway, Patch has won the contest. 1 million shonky toys are churned out and given to the children, and the subsequent Christmas they all fall apart.
Yeah. As you would expect. There's one great scene where there's I think it's a bike or like a trolley, which is unhinged, and then rolls into the middle of the street and a bus unceremoniously just runs over it without kind of slowing down or anything. There's no rhyme or reason for it. You think the bus driver would have at least had some kind of thought, well, there might be a child round here. That's
the thing, because a lot of children were riding in the trolleys. And so this trolley was a runaway trolley, but yeah, could have easily had a kid gone, which when you think about that, doesn't make you feel so good towards Patch. Obviously, these toys get returned somehow, but they all fly back to the North Pole, and Santa puts 2 and 2 together, and Patch is pretty much summarily dismissed. He kind of resigns before he jumps before he can get kicked out, but he leaves. But the funny thing is, in Patch's low moment when he's now been dismissed as Santa's assistant, he mutters something about, well, he just doesn't like me. And that's why he leaves the North Pole. He thinks Santa Claus doesn't like him, and he's got to.
What would have given him that impression?
Well, I think
other than all of the toys not working for the whole year.
I think you weren't fired because he doesn't like you. You were fired because you did a terrible job and endangered children. I think that's a good reason to be fired. So this is the funny thing. We'll come to again Patch's arc, because it really, if you think about it, Patch is more of a protagonist than Santa. Patch does things that drives the plot. Santa is kind of just there as the embodiment of everything. I think that's reflected in the credit order. So David Huddleston as Santa Claus is only 3rd on the billing, despite being the eponymous hero of the film. Well, Dudley Moore was. This is mid-80s. Dudley Moore was box office at that point too. Although, given that, again, we'll come to the casting. I think Dudley Moore was not giving it his all.
I don't think so.
Patch, but not that he was doing a bad job. Patch is a charming little man, and Dudley Moore is also a charming little man. And I think that's about as far as it went.
Yeah, he was playing himself a lot, wasn't he?
However, we then cut. So Dudley Moore leaves the North Pole, having stolen the magical reindeer golden dust that makes things fly, which becomes important. And he thought, you allowed to take that away from you, Patch?
Yeah. And also, I don't know where he stole. Where does he keep it? Because it looks like he steals a handful. But as the film progresses, you realise that he must have stolen like a warehouse worth.
I think it was like a fungus, and one small thing will generate spores. Because there's clearly a master pot of the golden stuff that generates more of it. But so he leaves the North Pole to seek his fortune. But then we cut to, I think, an actor who we can say really is putting in a shift. Because
he's brilliant.
We come to John Lithgow as the evil industrialist BZ, which is the most 80s name they could have given him.
Yeah. I'd forgotten just how over the top and brilliant his performance is in the film. It's a sight to behold.
Yeah, I hadn't realised either, because when I watched it as a kid, he was just an evil villain. But now you watch, he's bringing every emotion to the film.
Oh, it's brilliant.
And his face is contorting. And anyway, so we first see him. He's in a kind of Senate hearing because his toys are basically lethal. They're hilariously bad.
I like the fact, they rip the teddy bear and there's nails and sawdust in it. I mean, talk about literal. Yeah. Talk about literal. There's no subtlety there at all, is there?
I know, but also you think it's going to be harder to put nails and broken glass in a panda than it is to not do it at all. But yeah, so John Lithgow, or BZ, is being told his toy, basically he's in trouble because his toys are horrible and he must recall them all. Patch the elf then sees all the BZ toys being ripped off the shelves and assumes it's because they're really successful. So approaches John Lithgow, where once again but I think John Lithgow has a hilarious scene where he's approached by this elf who says, "I want to help you make a magic ingredient to give away for free."
Yeah.
Which BZ kind of eventually sees the merit of in terms of public image and also to settle the suckers up for the next one.
Yeah, because there's a great scene in his office where the film is really good for characters taking things at face value. I mean, at least the John Lithgow character, at least BZ has some incredulity at the fact that this elf can disappear and reappear in his office at various points. But it doesn't take him long to just get over that.
Oh no!
Okay, fine. Here we go. This man, because he must assume it's a man, not an elf, because obviously elves don't exist. This man can contort himself into small spaces in my office at the click of a finger. But it's the scene where he goes free, and it looks like he's going to have a heart attack, and it's brilliant.
That was very well done. It's all in the expressions. He's doing a lot.
Yeah.
And that's the funny thing. Dudley Moore is just kind of sitting there. I know Patch is meant to be quite easygoing and just saying things, but that's all he does. And John Lithgow is sort of doing 3 acts from Hamlet on the other side of the table.
I mean, the thing is, there's overacting, but I don't think the role. I don't think that's fair. I think the role calls for the most complete overacting masterclass of the 80s, probably.
Absolutely. And this is the whole thing. If it's a pantomime, he needs to be the pantomime villain, and that's exactly what he brings. He's a fantastic role.
Yeah.
So we probably skip to what Patch's plan is. Patch essentially plans to make lollipops infused with this golden reindeer magic that will make children float. And he also has a delivery system, which is the Patchmobile, which is essentially a chitty bang bang flying car, also fueled by this stuff. The interesting thing is that's the entire method he has for delivering the lollipops to every child in the world. He doesn't have Santa's magic. He doesn't have the passage of time with him. He has a flying car.
Yeah, and he still does it.
He still does it. So clearly, it's not
fair play. The thing is, we're assuming he doesn't have the passage of time, but maybe he does. I mean, who's to say that the elves don't?
I know, true.
Part of the process, aren't they? I mean, I've got to keep. We're on thin ice with the internal logic of the film anyway.
True.
Let's not unravel it too much.
Either way, So Patch, but also again, interesting. Patch has a modern vehicle that he zooms around in. Santa Claus is still in his old-fashioned reindeer and sleigh. And there's the old versus new is being set up there. Patch is the future. He does these modern methods. He's doing industrial line. Santa Claus is still doing this kind of stuff.
I find it interesting though that the phantasmagorical toy, the thing that is going to sell the product, the idea that Patch has this all-encompassing, all-consuming, literally consuming idea for a gift that will be given to children each Christmas is just a lollipop.
Yeah.
I'd forgotten about that, actually. I'd forgotten that in the film. And I thought, what was it now? Was it some kind of robot that transforms into a car or something? Oh, no, that's been done. It can't be that. It's a lollipop. It's just, it makes people float about. Yeah, okay, it makes people float about. But, I mean, maybe I'm hard to please, but I was just thinking, all right, it will soon lose its appeal.
Well, as soon as you've eaten it, I think.
Exactly, yeah. And it would never get past health and safety. It never get past health and safety.
What was that you said about internal logic of the film?
Okay.
Give it a magical renegade elf is leaving floating lollipops behind Christmas. I know. I think it's odd that Patch came up with almost something chemical or in that ingenuity, because all his other solutions were sort of modern industrial production lines, which you'd assume Beezy would say, we invented that 100 years ago. It's called Henry Ford.
Yeah.
I think actually using the magical reindeer stuff, he's kind of using Santa's own stuff against him.
I suppose I suppose that's something that Beezy couldn't have produced himself.
Yeah. But it is a huge hit. It makes Beezy massively successful again. People want more.
Not wealthy though, because it's free.
Not wealthy because it's free. However,
it's never quite established how that's going to help him.
Well, is it not? No, there's the backup plan or the next stage of the plan is where it comes in.
I know that there's a kind of Christmas 2 idea, which we'll come to, but I can't quite see how giving away all this stuff for free is really going to help him. Really?
Yeah, well, we'll come to Beezy's varying motivations. Beezy is basically as evil as the plot requires him to be, and he does zip around in what he wants to achieve. It's basically it's always bad, but it's never quite the same thing. But it's so anyway. The idea that everyone loves the lollipops and everyone hates Santa, although presumably he's now delivering good quality toys now that he's got Patch out of the works. But
I suppose
Santa Claus is depressed. It's mostly I think because Patch has run away. But Santa Claus there's a moment of doubt, and it's kind of the one moment when Santa is doubting anything about himself and not ho-ho-hoing his way through or adopting orphans and this kind of stuff. He's just sitting glum and kind of saying, maybe they don't want my old toys. Maybe I'm just an old fool.
I think he becomes petulant. I didn't like him. I didn't like him in these scenes. There's a scene where Puffy provides him with like a doll. Yeah. It's another doll, isn't it? He's like, I've developed this doll. It's beautifully presented. The craftsmanship in it is second to none. It's quality.
Children ought to like it.
Children ought to like it.
He's laying his heart out in front of Santa.
Yeah, he is. Yeah, and Santa Claus just looks at him like he's an idiot, and he's like, it's a doll. What do you want me to do with this?
He says, does it fly?
Yeah, does it fly? Yeah. Well, no, it doesn't. It doesn't fly. It's a doll.
Well, Puppy comes back with a great comeback. It wets.
Yeah.
And I think anyone with knowledge of children would say they would love a doll that wets. They can't get enough of
Yeah,
it.
it does say that, doesn't it? Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, which again puts poor Puffy. It's such a moment of bathos when Puffy's
Yeah,
like,
it is, yeah.
it wets. So,
Yeah, it's Gil from The Simpsons, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's what it's that kind of. It's that level of pathetic.
Yeah, and then Puffy's sent out with a flea in his ear again.
Yeah.
But so then BZ is clearly overjoyed because now he's convinced Patch to make Christmas 2 in March 25th because he can't wait the whole year. And this is when his money-making plot comes in. Everyone has to send him money if they want the next flying thing.
Yeah. But I like the way you send him money. Isn't that just buy the product?
Yeah, it's very good how they don't just say put in the orders. They just say, and they're sending in cash as well. It's like,
like you would do when you had to purchase a product.
Yeah, and he does allude to the fact it's going to be hundreds. What he's selling them now is no longer floating lollipops; it's flying candy canes.
Right, and because I've forgotten that as well, and I had in my head that they were going to roll out flying cars, because that surely would be the exciting thing, right?
It is actually. The moment the Patchmobile is revealed is very exciting. It's quite a moment.
So as a businessman, he's thinking, it's fantastic. Yeah, we're going to have these floating candy canes.
Yeah. Not
the floating car. I
would say candy canes are easier to churn out in the millions than flying cars.
Yeah, but flying car. But you've got the ingredients for the flying. All you need to do is produce the car.
Yeah.
The car itself is not a hard concept to sell, and this one flies.
I liked the car reveal because at the end of the runway was BZ, the flunky, and 3 extras who were clearly told improvise enthusiasm for as long as until I say cut, because you have the 5 actors there just yelling, "Come on, come on, come on" for a long time.
Yeah.
However, there's a problem with the candy canes.
Too strong, aren't they?
Too strong. Well, not too strong. They explode.
Yeah. They're too flammable.
Yeah, when left near extreme or even moderate heat, because they mentioned that near a radiator does it. So I wouldn't call a radiator extreme heat. I would call a radiator, a comfortable temperature, and that causes the candy cane to explode.
Yeah. I would imagine in chemistry and physics, radiator heat would be described as very, very low level heat.
Yeah. But that does cause an entire room to be annihilated, according to the narrative. So that's quite a dangerous...
A terrible decision.
Yeah. BZ, on the other hand, has no intention of stopping production because he's been paid already. Although prior to learning about the candy canes, he is congratulating himself, saying Santa Claus is finished. They'll be writing to me, BZ. Which you think this is his new plan. He plans to supplant Santa Claus, which makes sense as kind of he's the villain of the piece. He would do that. And as soon as he finds out he's not going to do that, he decides to run away to Brazil.
Yeah.
Which is what I meant by he moves with the plot. Whatever he's required to be randomly evil, he will be.
So that he's always bad, but the ways in which he is bad are determined by where the plot needs to go next.
Yeah. And
so it's almost like his badness is the MacGuffin almost.
Yes. And prior to learning about the candy canes, because that's the big secret, he discovers little orphan Joe in his basement because Joe is trying to recover from a cold that Corny has let him in to recover from. Joe sneezes.
And he sneezes. Come on, schoolboy error, don't sneeze. What?
However, though, this is where we come back to BZ being as bad as he needs to be. BZ, upon finding a vagrant child in his basement, doesn't call the police or child services. He locks him away. It's like, put that kid on ice. It's like, why are you kidnapping him? That's a crime. You could just send him on his way.
He would have a legitimate cause to call the police. It would be legitimate. The police would come, they would arrest him. Well, they might not arrest him, but they would take him away.
And Joe hasn't
take him away. They didn't have to worry about him.
Joe hasn't heard anything incriminating by this point. This is the thing. He doesn't know about the exploding candy canes because it's important that he doesn't know later on in the story. But BZ, kind of flips out and locks him up, ties him in the dungeon, and then plans to run away to Brazil when he learns about the exploding candy canes. But Cornelia has heard all this and writes a letter to Santa Claus, who immediately has to rush out, even though 2 of his reindeer are sick, so he's 2 men down already.
And also, it's another example of Santa Claus favouring 2 specific children in all the children in the world for a very specific reason. Yeah. For some unfathomable reason, Santa Claus he's striked up a friendship with Joe. I don't understand it myself. Joe isn't a particularly engaging or charismatic character or actor, even in the film. And, Corny is a whiny child who demands that Santa Claus comes to rescue her and Joe at short notice, and he does it. And you think, God, what a sap.
But he doesn't even. It's not even for Cornelia. She's there because she told him. He does it. Let's do it for Joe.
Let's do it for Joe, and he's saying that to the reindeer. Let's do this for Joe. The reindeer. Why? He's been in basically 2 scenes with Santa Claus in the whole film, and they've got this incredible bond, that father-son bond.
Yeah. Although I will say they did allude to the fact that you sense there was the reason Santa Claus and Mrs. Claus back when they were human and alive couldn't have children.
They can't have children.
Because,
I get that.
Because there's a moment of points. We'll come to Mrs. Santa Claus, who we've skipped over in the plot recall because she doesn't really do anything in the plot.
No.
But there's a bit of a sadness. She goes, "We have no children," and then Santa Claus later says, "Imagine if we had a boy, he might be like Joe." And you're probably thinking, "Dodged a bullet there, Santa. If you thought he'd be like Joe." Yeah.
And I mean, in many ways, that's why Santa Claus is chosen, because he is father to all the children, isn't he? He doesn't have a child himself, but he's father to all the children.
Although he now favours Joe.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And as long as those children are white and Western, that's fine. That's fine.
We never did the reveal that Beezy is Cornelia's step uncle,
great uncle or something.
Uncle.
Yeah, step uncle. That's it.
Yeah, she's an orphan too, but she's living with her step uncle and her nanny. And once again, there's again a classic pantomime villain reveal. He kind of swivels around his chair and cackles manically when he says "Happy Christmas."
Cigar. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm trying to think, is there a reason that needs to happen? Maybe, because it brings Cornelia and everything into the whole plot, the fact he's the only
I suppose, it creates an additional layer of threat as well, I think, in that particular context, because it becomes personal, it's familial. So it's not an external type of danger, it's something that's very close to home. I think that adds that.
Yeah.
I mean, there isn't a lot of threat in the film.
Yeah.
I don't think really there isn't a lot of threat, but that is an added bit.
Yeah. So again, Joe is taken to the candy cane factory and locked up, where Patch immediately finds him.
Yeah. Immediately as well.
and I actually had to transcribe what Joe said, because Joe is really livid at Patch because he thinks that Patch is the reason everyone hates Santa Claus, and Joe lets fly with Patch with the most PG and again Depression era insults you can think of. He calls him a dummy, stupid, idiot, stink-faced creep. Which of course makes poor Patch recoil in horror that he could be any of these things.
Well, if someone said that to me, Hugh, you don't want to know what I'd do.
Surely, James, someone has said that to you in your life.
Well, I've been called a stupid man, and I held it together quite well. And if someone called me what was it?
A dummy, stupid, idiot, stink-faced creep.
Yeah, no, I'm not having that. I'm getting angry now. The hairs on my back. That's right, I said it. The hairs on my back are standing.
Well, anyway, after letting fly with this expostulation, Joe
nicely ignoring the hairs on my back statement. Let's keep going.
We'll lose it in the edit. Joe again turns around. They have a scuffle. A little carving that Santa Claus made for Joe comes out. Dudley Moore picks up and goes, "It's me." It looks nothing like Dudley Moore. It's the old thing where they do in films where they've cut a portrait or a carving. And it's like, it's you. It's like, that's not you. That's nothing like you. What did the props guy have to do? But Dudley Moore recognises himself in it. And then
it looks more like George Burns.
If George Burns had played Patch, that'd have been a whole different movie. But from this, Dudley Moore's story kind of concludes, because he goes, he likes me, Santa Claus likes me, and then that's like,
that's it.
But that's
basically the end of the film then.
But
I mean, I know that there's another 15 to 20 minutes, but that's the end of the story.
And yet that was never the lesson that Dudley Moore had to learn. The lesson that Patch had learned was, be careful about the things you do.
Take pride in your job.
Which he singly failed, because then he loads up his flying car with exploding candy canes, puts Joe in the car, and then flies off to the North Pole.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, the lesson isn't I want people to like me.
Yeah.
That's a rubbish lesson.
So they get into the exploding car. The candy canes start to smoke and fuse. Santa Claus chases after them. Goads the reindeer into pulling off
the super duper loop,
the famed super duper looper, which I don't know how that works to rescue them. But
that's exactly what I was going to say. It is completely redundant. They don't need to do it,
because the super duper looper involves flying under Patch's car.
Which would be enough.
Yes, looping around and then flying under it again. But if you presumably go fast enough to catch up with the car and go under it, you've done your job.
You've done your job, yeah. It is a completely redundant act. There is no discernible reason why Santa Claus would decide at that point to choose to do that very difficult and dangerous stunt, unless he wanted to teach Patch a lesson and say, I can absolutely rescue you right now, but I'm just going to tease it out a bit longer because you've been really a real scumbag here. So here we go. I'm going to do the super duper loop. And maybe I'll rescue you or not.
I think
we'll have to see what happens.
Also, it's lucky because basically the car blows up. Joe and Patch get thrown into the air and then
it's
fall into sand. It's very lucky, and it does not involve the super duper looper one whit.
No, I would imagine that the point at which the car blew up, Santa Claus was thinking, "Oh, I should have done this. I should have just saved them. I've got a dead child and a dead elf on my hands now."
We'll scoop him up, feed him to the reindeer. No one will look. No one's coming looking for Joe. But I suppose he had the rich kid in the sleigh with him, so he'd be all right. Yeah. To protect the rich. That's the moral of the story.
Yeah.
But I will say the reason for the super duper looper shenanigans is twofold. I think one is to show that Santa's sleigh can go faster than Patch's machine. So it's like the old, if you've got grit, because he keeps yelling, "Give it the old college try," which is a very preppy thing for a 13th century Santa Claus to say.
It is, yeah.
But they do it, so it's to show that the sleigh is better than the Patchmobile. But also they do it because Donna the reindeer, the only one of the 8 reindeer to have a story arc.
Yeah.
Donna's the one who's afraid at the beginning. Patch has to befriend him. Donna can't do the super duper looper. And Joe says, "Hey, Donna, don't sweat it, man." And then Donna does it. So Donna the reindeer has a thing that goes on. It's a very small arc, but to be honest, it's more than Puffy gets.
Yeah, and the elf that doesn't say any words but he's bullied.
The mute elf. There wasn't Goober. Goober was the Ain't Our Fopman. Anyway, so the kids are rescued. They're flown back to the North Pole. They're kept there. I thought they would have been kept there forever, but they now, on revisiting it, they're kept there for a year. They're sent back next Christmas.
But why a year? Can we stay for the year, just for the year?
Yeah.
I mean, Joe, I can understand, but surely Cornelius has lawyers who will be looking. They'll be after some kind of severance.
Well, that nanny's out of a job for one thing.
Well, yeah, exactly, yeah, and she's got how much would she be inheriting?
Yeah.
Get back.
Oh yeah, that's what we should mention actually. In between all this flying patch business, Beezy gets his comeuppance. The police who.
Yeah. Actually, this is one of my favourite scenes in the film as well, and I don't know how they do it. I can't figure out how they filmed it because it looks very clever. I mean, describe it, please.
Okay, well, the police have arrived at Beezy's factory. His flunkies. He looks out the window and sees his flunkies being arrested. Cornelia has called the cops, and apparently they believed her that he had an elf and he kidnapped a boy, and that would be enough. That would get you arrested.
Yeah.
So Beezy now panics, goes to his office, whips open his drawer full of the magical candy canes, stuffs a load in his mouth, and then the police open the door. He's by his open window with candy canes dripping from his grinning visage as he snickers and then steps out of the window, and rather than flying away like Superman, finds himself floating uncontrollably into the stratosphere. Yeah. And it's that moment where they flip from office to outdoor.
Yeah, this is it. That's the scene, yeah. I think, and I really like that scene because it's composed very well. So you flip from inside to outside. He's on the ledge and he jumps off, and the camera is below him, looking up, and it doesn't look like it doesn't look like a green screen. It doesn't look like it's cut and paste. It doesn't look like it's wires. Yeah. And he's floating there, and then very slowly he floats off, and it doesn't look fake.
No, it's a good one, and that's the end of Beezy.
That's the end of Beezy. You do see him a bit later because he can apparently breathe in space. But
this is the thing. Once Santa has they're all dancing. They all got a big dance number like the Ewoks at the end. The elves are dancing, Santa's dancing with the kids, and that's the end of the movie. I would say, Patch once again is around his mates cheering what a rescue he had, rather than saying, "Patch, what have you done?"
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he's very egotistical. He's very self-serving. I think Patch. I disliked him profoundly.
Yeah, I noticed that Puffy is no longer wearing the assistant apron either. So I'm kind of considering Patch is taking the prodigal son. They've slain the fatted calf. They've ripped the assistant apron off Puffy. They've given it back to Patch. And they all have big dance.
No one learns anything.
No, and they all. Well, here's the thing. Let's talk about Puffy and Patch. What they should have done is kind of had a scene of them shaking hands, because basically Patch can churn out toys. Puffy is very good with quality assurance. Yeah, that would have been a good partnership.
Work together.
And they never.
It'd be a great partnership.
Mostly because Puffy is very underdrawn and has a stupid beard and gets to have dolls that wet themselves. But if you're talking about a theme in a movie, The idea of craftsmanship and and carving toys and all this kind of stuff, and the fact that it has a place in the world still, in a world of mass production and pandas full of broken glass and nails and sawdust.
But, I mean, the 80s wasn't great for that, idea that there was a place for craftsmanship and artisanal activity and kind of dedication to a profession. Specifically, it was just about churning stuff out, spending money, buying things, throwing things away.
Yeah, and then the last scene is once they've had their dance number, we float past the North Pole, the land, up into the stars, and the last person we see is BZ, who's floating into space, still yelling, "Get me down!" And
who he's yelling to, I don't know, and how he's alive.
Yeah, I don't think he's going to be alive for long. I think that was the end of BZ, which brings an interesting question: is that BZ scoffed a lot of candy canes, but we had maybe 3 or 4. He munched them, he picked up a handful and stuffed them in his mouth, and that caused him to fly into space to his death. Now, BZ is probably 3 to 4 times the weight and mass of a child. So are we saying that Patch's candy canes would have launched every child in the world into space, and in fact he had lethal sweeties that he was going to deliver to every child who would have scoffed them down, and in fact an annihilation of children was prevented by Patch, who once again probably didn't test the candy canes, just churned them out, just used the formula. Once again, Patch is at fault for not having good quality assurance.
Well, there is an alternative Santa Claus the movie story, which I think when we get into the kind of themed analysis, I'll discuss. But there's a lot there that I think would make sense if some of the decisions about the production of the film had come off in the first instance.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good time. We will take a break, and we'll head right into the reason we chose to look at this film, and indeed the analysis of themes. We are going to look at the reason why. Let's say I chose this film. This was my turn to choose a film, and I chose Santa Claus the movie to be the first one of the weekend at Crombie film review. I think I saw this movie when it came out. I definitely remember having the poster that came inside a free children's magazine, because it was on my wall with the creases down the middle and everything. And given that, I must have gone to see it, because it's the kind of thing exactly my parents would have felt happy taking me to.
Yeah.
So I must have seen it, and it was a perennial after that on sort of the BBC Christmas time.
Yeah. It was on a lot as well, wasn't it? It's one of those films as well, which I think, because it was released in the mid-80s, it was at a point at which, speaking personally, I was becoming aware. My memories are they go back to about the mid-80s, if I'm being honest. So I remember being aware of the film, understanding the themes within it, understanding the plot, and because it's a Christmas film, actually quite enjoying it as well.
Yeah, we should point out this because you were a child in the 80s, not because you have dementia and you can only remember.
No, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
You're not 70.
No, I'm not 70 living in the 80s.
Yeah, you've not blanked out the Cuban Missile Crisis because it was too traumatic. But yes, I was a similar age, and it was a good perennial thing to watch. You always watched it before Christmas because it was always a Christmas Eve run-up film.
Definitely.
It was never the Christmas film, but yeah.
For goodness' sake, there'd be no point watching it in mid-January, for example.
No, or reviewing it and taking the best part of an hour to go over it would be the least sensible thing you could do. But the other reason I had, when I was thinking about old movies I'd like to watch again, it just got me thinking that this movie has a lot of the same structure beats as kind of the dominant movie form now, which is the superhero movie. Again, Superman came before this, the first one that kicked it off, but this almost is closer to the beats of ordinary guy has an extraordinary experience. He goes through, he gets the gadgets, the reindeer, he gets the uniform, he picks out almost the iconic thing. It's like if Spider-Man is choosing his Spider-Man suit that we know he's going to end up with because we know what Spider-Man looks like.
Well, that's exactly what I was going to say.
The red outfit because that's what Santa Claus looks like. And
it is a superhero film with an origin story.
And it may be the first superhero film. If you again, Superman was before that, but in terms of following the pattern that is now set of you must have an origin story, because Superman had a beginning to his story where he grew up, but he didn't have an origin in the sense of he acquires his powers and he acquires his uniform and he acquires his motivation. He just does his.
He is already Superman, isn't he? I mean, I suppose he's Superman when he lands on Earth, but he already has that persona, he has that identity as well.
Yeah, and if you were to draw a line then between Santa Claus the movie and Sam Raimi's Spider-Man and Captain America and
and the Marvel universe,
the whole Marvel shebang, when they origin someone, it's like, this is what they do. You get your ordinary guy, you give them an experience, you give them the uniform that's bright and colourful and iconic, and you know they're going to end up with. You have fun with them. They fly around. They meet people. They have a villain at the end that they defeat, and then you set up for the sequel, Christmas 2.
And it's interesting that I've not seen this film for a long time, but it was a stock film in the late 80s and early 90s when I was growing up that I would watch regularly, at Christmas. It was one of those films that I looked forward to and enjoyed because of its Christmassy feel and because of the kind of the place it holds in my youth in that regard. And I'd kind of forgotten a little bit about the detail of the origin story in the film itself. I had no recollection of them freezing to death, for example, which shocked. I mean, that is a bleak scene when they freeze to death. It's borderline shocking because it's not quick either. It's a slow death, and there's real dread there.
Because he uses the phrase "you'll freeze to death."
Yeah, you'll freeze to death.
And also, up to that point, it's very real. There's no colourful North Pole. It's brown and earthy colours, and it's in the snow. I will say, the snow did very much look like someone was in the studio throwing soap flakes at them, because they haven't quite advanced to that level. But it certainly played for realism.
Well, I think the other thing that intrigued me when I watched it again, I know that you've said about the kind of the blueprint or the framework from which more modern superhero films have been cut. I suppose the cloth from which they have been cut. I guess. I mean, I suppose if you speak to I don't know who directs the films. If you speak to people like J.J. Abrams or people like that, they probably wouldn't cite Santa Claus the movie as the kind of the predecessor. And nevertheless, you can see some of those tropes and some of those themes in it. But and again, I know that we're talking about those modern superhero films, but there is also a lot of actual Superman in the film as well. So the flying, I think, has been directly influenced by Superman. The Ice Palace is such a kind of correlation to the Ice Palace that Superman takes Lois Lane to. It's his home, the Fortress of Solitude. It's a very similar process, and it's and when you look at the producers of the film, Ilya Salkind produced the Superman movies, produced the Supergirl movie, and then produced this as part of that process. See the lineage coming through.
He also says Santa Claus doesn't lie, which was again something that Superman set his stall against too. There is this iconic immortal figure that is better than you, that's flying in to help you. The other key theme, and this might be stretching it a little bit, but the other key theme that I saw in the film, and again, this won't come as a surprise if you enjoy watching superhero films, because I think that there is a very strong link between most of the kind of superhero films and a kind of religious undertone or a connotation as well. And I saw quite a lot of religious rhetoric in the film, and I mean that in a kind of like, it was an interesting way to do it. It might not have been deliberate, but there was certainly a lot there. So the opening sequence when Claus is delivering the toys, it's almost like a feeding of the 5,000, as it were. They're waiting patiently for these toys. There's a resurrection scene where he dies and is brought back to life. The elves are like angels almost, and they live in this palace with heavenly gates. There's the fallen angel in Patch, who is cast out of Santa Claus's home because of greed and because of the idea that he could be better than what was being delivered. You've got the Burgess Meredith character, who is almost like a godlike figure, a kind of a Father, the Son, and the Holy Christ, as it were. So there's a lot there, but you do see a lot of that in superhero films as well. The Ubermensch, as it were, that the idea that the individual is immortal. That whole thought. They care for the subjects of the earth, as it were. They have a moral purpose. I thought the kind of religious undertones were quite strong in that context as well. Yeah, it's a rare superhero movie where the superhero isn't laying on his back with his arms outstretched at some point. It's true, and I found that quite interesting actually, and I quite liked it. I mean, the thing I would say about it is that it with all of those things, with all of those links, it reminds me of. For me, it's one of the quintessential 80s films in that regard. It brings back such
emotions and feelings at the time. If I'm honest, I can't remember sitting down and watching Santa Claus the movie, but I know I did because I've seen it before. But what it does more than anything else, it kind of kickstarts a kind of chemical reaction in me, which is about unpacking some of that kind of emotional feeling that you get when you're a child and Christmas is coming.
Yeah.
It was really Christmassy. I know that sounds stupid for a film called Santa Claus the movie, but the first half, the first 40 minutes, is beautifully rendered. Is a beautifully rendered Christmas movie.
Yeah.
Which I'd want to show to Robin, my son. I want him to experience that. I think the first 40 minutes were great.
Yeah, that's why I was happy to get a copy of it, because I knew that as soon as the boys get to watch it, we're going to watch a lot of it. And you're right. And in fact, if this were, say, an action movie, that first 40 minutes would be the biggest action splash they could do, because that's when they really throw a lot at it, saying this is Christmassy, this is the good feeling, this is the elf workshop, this is the grotto to end all grottos. And they throw it at it. I'd say, interestingly, with the reason why there's clearly a divide. We've talked about it already. There's the origin montage and the what you call the plot of the story. And almost the issues with it is because there's no antagonist till that we get into the modern times. Because he's an immortal character, it's hard to set up an antagonist at the beginning, because he's got to have a regular antagonist who's BZ. I did think, and when I saw this as a young thing, was the little boy who was a cat torture meant to be BZ? Until I realised he needed to be about 200 years old for it to happen.
Exactly.
Although I thought, again, they could have hinted something. Little baby BZ is not getting his present because he's mean.
Maybe.
But I thought more than that is, if this was a superhero origin story, there would be an evil or a negative for the superhero to react against to become a certain way, and there isn't. He's a nice guy. He dies in the snow, but he's basically told to be a nice guy, but even more so. And I thought that didn't need to be, because there is a theme in there. When Santa Claus is glum, saying what happened to the spirit of Christmas, giving a gift and everything. Of Santa Claus is nice because the world is not always nice. And they don't really hammer it home, but they could have done that. The reason he's giving toys to all these villages is maybe the village is starving, maybe these villages are oppressed by some cruel fife lord or whatever, and those toys are the best moment of their year, and that's why he's willing to risk death to do it. And they could have done a bit more with that, saying Santa is always nice, even though the world is bad, and BZ is just the latest example of how bad the world is. They don't really do that, which is why it feels like it's an origin story, and then it's another story. I completely agree. I'm not. I mean, it was great that the John Lithgow character was given the screen time, because he's a fantastic character in it. BZ is a great character in it, but if I'm honest, I wanted more of the origin story, and I wanted more of where that led him. I don't know what that would be, in the basis that, okay, Santa Claus already has a well-established character arc in culture, so you can't really do a lot with the character, because it would be daft, because everyone knows that's who he is. So you're kind of restricted in terms of the kind of characterization of the specific individual. But as you say, what you can do then is you can make sure that the plot and the story itself has that moral arc, rather than the character himself. And so therefore, as much as I loved the John Lithgow performance, he's in the half of the film which was far less successful for me, far less interesting, and far less meaningful, I guess, as a consequence of that. I found the last 45 minutes, it didn't hold my attention as much as the first 45 minutes, shall we say. And it's because, you're right, there isn't that kind of core strong antagonist that is a direct kind of linked to Santa Claus or the process that he's going through. It's a bolt-on almost, because they need it to move on. They need it to be a story about something. It can't just be about. It can't be kind of like a documentary about how Santa might live. Well, here's the funny thing is, you're right in that, is that there are essentially two films. One short film is called Santa Claus the Movie. The other short film is The Adventures of Patch the Elf.
You're right.
That could have been a movie or a cartoon about an elf in Santa's workshop who goes too far, gets banished, meets John Lithgow, has fun and games, and Santa Claus is kind of almost a secondary character who saves the day because he's Santa Claus and he's benevolent and benign and all powerful.
Yeah.
But you don't need to have the origin stories because everyone knows who Santa is. But then at the beginning of this, if you have another short film, the Santa Claus the Movie, that is this woodcutter comes and becomes Santa Claus, this mortal figure. But then that's it. He just delivers toys, and they bolt them together. Again, not in a successful way because you're right. One is overwhelmingly, almost aggressively Christmassy with the montages and the good feelings, and the other one is a bit of fun and games with Dudley Moore playing an elf and John Lithgow playing a pantomime villain.
And as good as they are, as good as John Lithgow is, it's not an interesting story.
No,
it doesn't hold your attention as much. I don't think in that particular context. I mean, there's a modern tendency in biographical films to instead of showing the story of an individual through their life, that they pick a particular challenge that they have had to deal with. So I'm thinking, Darkest Hour is one example. It's a film ostensibly about Winston Churchill, but it isn't actually about Winston Churchill per se. It's about a particular period in time in Winston, and this is the same.
You have Steve Jobs, Ali. They all. You think you're watching
Mandela, Long Walk. It's taking a specific thing. So actually, if you were talking about a kind of prototype of the modern superhero film. Perhaps it's also a prototype of the modern biographical movie as well, in the sense that it doesn't Santa Claus the movie. You might expect to have Santa Claus's early childhood through to his angst-ridden teenage years, where he hated making toys and he actually broke the toys and he was mean to children. He didn't talk to his mum and dad. His kind of like progressive liberal arts style 20s and 30s. He's more conservative older, but he grows into. But no, it's actually. It's the part of Santa Claus's life where he dies and becomes Santa. Obviously, the most important and interesting part of his life.
He appears fully formed. He has the beard, the reindeer, the sack of toys.
Exactly.
They just supercharge him into the immortal figure.
Yeah. So maybe Santa Claus the movie has had a far bigger influence on the trajectory of cinema than we
definitive, yeah.
It's definitive, yeah, it is, yeah. So, I mean, for me, the Christmas aspect of the first 45 minutes worked fantastically well, but I don't think it could have been longer than that.
No.
I don't know what they would have done more that would have kind of given it any more. They needed to move away, but they moved away in a method that didn't really work in that particular context for me. The second half was it was okay, but I'd say after 45 minutes I was thinking, this is pretty good. This is all right. I'm enjoying this. And after the film I was thinking, it was all right.
Yeah, and I think it was almost the reluctance to give Santa any flaws or the stuff he could really work with. He is Santa throughout. He never has a doubt. And to look at other screen Santas, I was thinking of Miracle on 34th Street, where Richard Attenborough's Santa is much more rounded because he has moments of weakness, moments of doubt.
He's human, isn't he? That's the thing. He's a human being. He's not Santa Claus, which is
but again,
effectively some kind of alien being, actually.
Yeah. And that is effectively. But that's the Miracle on 34th Street is a moment in Santa Claus's life. It's not the whole story of Santa Claus.
That's
which
true
is,
as well.
This film's ambition is we're going to do Santa Claus. And we're going to do it. We're going to do the Coca-Cola Santa Claus that you know and love. You'll see him in this movie. You'll see the reindeer. You'll see that fat jolly man. You'll get the lot.
There are a couple of other things that I found might be worth mentioning about the film as well. So you spoke about some particular points in the film at which you thought this could go into a very dark and disturbing kind of plot development. The pulling the gun out on Joe and Corny, for example, the leaving Patch and Joe to fall to their deaths from the car, the grinding down of the children's bones and feeding them to the reindeer, and the children floating off into space.
Yeah, I should be a script doctor, really.
You should. The interesting thing is that Ilya Salkin's first choice as director for the film was John Carpenter, and that's absolutely real. And the John Carpenter version of Santa Claus the movie, I think, would have had all of those elements in the film, and it is a film that I would absolutely love to see. And the reason why John Carpenter, and it wasn't that Ilya Salkind turned John Carpenter down. John Carpenter turned the movie down on the basis that he wasn't given complete control over the narrative arc of the film, and he wasn't allowed to compose the soundtrack. So those were the reasons why he turned it down. So it was very likely at some point that John Carpenter would have directed the film, and if the first choice for Santa Claus would have been chosen as well, he would have directed Brian Dennehy as the Santa Claus. So can you imagine a film which has Brian Dennehy as the Santa Claus and John Carpenter as the director? It would have been as a children's Christmas film. That is a film I need to watch. That film.
Oh my God.
That needs to be made. Somebody stump up the money to give John Carpenter a film to make his version of Santa Claus the movie. I want to see that.
I'm not sure Brian Dennehy's available anymore.
No, yeah, maybe not. Maybe, yeah, John Goodman, maybe. And yeah, I suppose the other thing there is that David Huddleston, I've not seen him in anything else other than as he's been in 2 films that I've seen, and both he plays the eponymous character, Santa Claus the movie and The Big Lebowski.
Yeah, and he's good in both of them, to be honest. We should talk about David Huddleston. We've not really dwelt on him. I think he does okay as Santa. I think he's what's required to be Santa.
Can I be honest?
Yep.
I think David Huddleston is a brilliant Santa Claus in this film. I think when I think of Santa Claus, actually, I think of David Huddleston, which is a really stupid thing, but he is completely ingrained into my bones as Santa Claus. Your memories are supposed to create kind of ridges in your brain. They're kind of physical, dense. One of those ridges is David Huddleston as Santa Claus. I think he's perfect, actually. For what he's given, he's perfect as Santa Claus, particularly in those first 40 minutes.
Yeah.
I think he's great. I think he's absolutely fantastic in it. It's just a shame that he's only third on the bill behind John Lithgow and Dudley Moore. Well, he is despite the film being about him. I mentioned earlier that there's a lot of product placement in it, and there's one particular scene which. It's my favourite scene in the film. It's where Joe is wandering the streets and he's obviously hungry. And he stands outside a McDonald's, and he stands outside the McDonald's. The scene goes on for about 3 minutes. It's ridiculous. Yeah. It's really quite poignant. And he stands outside and he's looking in, and then the camera moves from outside the McDonald's to inside the restaurant, looking out at Joe. And then it's Tarkovsky in it, its beauty and its slow pace. It moves away from Joe and it pans into a couple of scenes of children having their happy meals, and then it focuses on one particular family. There's a child and a woman, and they're sat down at the table, and this woman, she takes about 8 chips out of the packaging and stuffs them all in her mouth. It's the most unrealistic chip eating acting. I mean, people don't eat chips like that. You don't just take a big handful of chips and stuff them in your mouth.
Wait,
do you? I don't.
I don't know. Feel bad about the way I eat chips when I'm really hungry.
She's like, it's like when you're being asked, just act that you're talking to your child. So she's obviously not saying anything because the music's going on in the background, so you can't hear what she's saying. She's moving her mouth. Just act, eating some chips. That's fine. So she makes like a shovel full of chips and just shoves them all in her mouth. I looked at it and thought, what's going on here? Is this a comedy scene or something?
You don't think that was meant to show that these people have access to all the food they want and therefore can eat chips with abandon?
It did smack of gluttony. Yeah. It was interesting.
But yeah, it was a long lingering shot on McDonald's, and again, all you need to do is establish Joe is hungry, and it was very much everyone's having a grand old Christmas at McDonald's. Yeah, exactly.
And here's another bit, the Diet Coke scene as well. There's another one. Yes. It's in there. I want you to ask you about what you thought of how the film looked as well, because it's a big budget, and it cost $50 million US in 1985.
Yeah,
and
to give context, I mean, what would that buy in 1985? I mean, let's say, surely Back to the Future was made for less than that. Star Wars was certainly made for less than that.
So I've done a bit of research on this, and if the most expensive film of all time at that time was Superman, and that cost $55 million in 1978. Okay, so at the time of it being made, it would have been maybe the second, third, or fourth most expensive film ever made. Santa Claus the movie. What? So, as an example, Back to the Future and The Goonies together cost less. And the thing for me is, so Back to the Future cost $19 million and Goonies cost $19 million each. Yeah. Each. Just under $40 million for the pair, and Santa Claus the movie costs $50 million. In today's money, it would be about $115 to $120 million. It would probably be in the top 75 to 100 most expensive films of all time, and it made $20 million. It was a huge financial crash and failure. And for me, other than the flying. Yeah. And the kind of the composition of some of the early scenes, I don't see where the money went.
No, I was going to say that the filmmaking, sometimes the camera work doesn't look top notch. It does vary between studio and external shots. They didn't spend it on the stars because. Again,
what did they spend the money on? I mean, they must have spent the money on the reindeer, and I mean that genuinely. That must have been an expensive process. It was the 39th. Biggest grossing film of 1985, 39th, behind Weird Science, which cost $7 million, and one above the Care Bears movie, which cost $2 million. So we are talking one of the biggest flops in cinematic history, which I think is unfair.
I think it's unfair. I think it had too much money thrown at it. I think it's a $20 million movie, and that's the problem.
Yeah.
It looked like $20 million. It cost $50. I think maybe it had a lot of production issues then because
maybe.
Yeah, because I'm guessing they hired Dudley Moore for star power because this was Dudley Moore off the back of Arthur and 10.
Yeah. So he would have been a big star at the time.
Yeah, I think maybe they had the same thoughts as they hired Gene Hackman for Superman. He lends it a touch of class. They do the same for Dudley Moore, but again, Dudley Moore was Patch the Elf was never going to sell the movie.
No.
And also and also, again, the audience isn't going to go, "Oh, Dudley Moore, I loved it in 10." That bit Bojack.
Yeah. And I suppose unlike films like Back to the Future, which was made for a significantly smaller budget and have kind of lasted, they've stood the test of time, I guess. Really, is that the actors? I mean, other than John Lithgow, perhaps, but he's not a household name, I would say. Certainly he's more of a character actor. Yeah. But Dudley Moore, David Huddleston, they're not. You don't say, for example, Superman the movie starring X in the same way that you might say Back to the Future starring Michael J. Fox or Indiana Jones starring Harrison Ford. They still hold some kind of kudos. Yeah. That's not the film's fault, because it's not to know what they're going to be doing in the future. Yeah. But it just doesn't have any of that kind of star quality, I don't think.
But basically, it's again, Care Bears the movie. It's probably that level. It's a movie that children who are 10 and younger will go and see. But teenagers wouldn't go and see it, and that's your Back to the Future crowd. So it's not going to print itself in. So you'd get your family tickets sold, and that's about it. Adults wouldn't see it.
But I can't. But $50 million. I mean, that's ridiculous.
I think that probably speaks to a troubled production. Brian Dennehy was really dragging it out for a long time.
John Carpenter filmed 8 death scenes. It is a film of two halves for me, of which the first half is very good, and of which the second half doesn't quite work as well. And it is clearly a superhero film. And that's what it is. It is tapping into that kind of Superman superhero process that was popular at the time. That was a kind of like a winning formula, except that it didn't win on this occasion because it didn't have an antagonist. It didn't have that moral threat, I guess. Yeah.
And again, ultimately, it's about a figure that's beloved by children under 10 and then not really after that age.
And that, exactly. Yeah. I thought it would have longer lasting appeal because it's something that you might wheel out every Christmas. And if I'm honest, it's something that I probably will do from now on. Having revisited it, I enjoyed revisiting an old friend who I'd forgotten about, and I'll do that when Robin grows up a little bit, and I think it will be a nice experience. It's no Back to the Future though. it's no Superman the movie.
So there it is. Let's now go to the judgment, and then we'll announce what we'll be viewing next. We come to the judgment where we will score each film between 1 and 5 Crombies, disembodied floating Crombie heads. So 1 obviously being the lowest, 5 being the highest. So James, would you like to give it how many Crombies out of 5?
Yeah, and just to point out that if people don't understand what a Crombie is, that's okay. You'll never know. It's fine.
It's not essential to your enjoyment of this podcast.
So I will be giving Santa Claus the movie 3 Crombie heads.
3 Crombie heads. Your justification for that?
It sparked some feelings in me that were nostalgic, but not in a bad way. It's a film that I think I remember fondly, and I still have those fond memories intact. And because of that, it must have something about it.
Okay, and my score, I concur. I would also give it 3 Crombies out of 5. I think structurally it is not a good film, but it is a very fun film. And you again, it gets in and out within the 2 hours. That's always important for a film that is huge.
Shorter than this podcast.
Shorter than this podcast. You could have actually sat down and watched Santa Claus the movie rather than listen to it, which I'd probably recommend doing. I'm going to go on live saying Santa Claus the movie is more entertaining than the two of us talking for an hour and 40.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure.
But we didn't pay $50 million to do so. So there's that. So it's not a good movie. It is a fun movie, and you'll enjoy yourself watching it. So here's your 3 floating Crombies.
Brilliant.
So now we'll find out what film. So this next film will be in February. We do one a month, and now James has the chair. He will choose the film we're going to watch. I am in the dark as to what this is, so you can await my gasp of horror. James, what are we going to be watching?
So I have chosen as the February Weekend at Crombie's film Phantom of the Paradise. That's Phantom of the Paradise. And Phantom of the Paradise is a Brian De Palma film from the mid-70s. It is a musical, it is a horror, and it is a comedy. And it is a film directed by Brian De Palma that I have not seen.
I have not only not seen it, I've never heard of it. It sounded like you were just putting together verbs there.
We will get onto the discussion of why I've chosen it and what the title means and what it is like in the next podcast, but it is Phantom of the Paradise.
Phantom of the Paradise. I look forward to it. I look forward to discussing it. And just to wrap this up then, thank you all for listening. We thank you for listening to our inaugural podcast. If you made it through to the end, congratulations.
I feel like we need a kind of like a closing catchphrase, don't we? And I don't know what it is.
If you think of one, we'll edit it in. But if not, we'll just say, enjoy your weekend at Crombie's.
Evening all.
Bye-bye.